Morena Koto. Welcome everybody to our webinar on cultivation and winter grazing. First, I'd like to really thank everybody for joining us today. Realise everybody's really busy and time poor at the moment, so we appreciate you making the time to join us. If people aren't able to attend, the webinar will be uploaded to our website, so you're welcome to those people who might happen to watch this after the event itself. Just to introduce myself briefly, my name is Bruce Halligan. I'm the Strategic Regulatory Advisor in our regulatory team here. I'm deputising today for Hayley Fitchett, who's our GM of Strategy and Regulation. Unfortunately, Hayley is unwell, but she was very keen to attend this. Before I go much further, I'd just like to introduce the members of the Environment Southland team. We are going to tag team around this presentation today. So I'll be hearing from Lauren from our regional planning team. Lauren's going to talk about the development of the rules we're discussing today. Our regional planning team, to explain what they do, work through the public processes to get goals for resource management in Murihiku Southland and how these goals will be achieved. Our water and land plan has been a big part of the team's work going back to 2015. Anastasia and Keith work in our land sustainability team. They provide advice to customers on farm. Paul works in our resource management compliance team. And Nicola works in our freshwater farm plan team. These staff are all really passionate about what they do and they're always happy to help. That's what we're here for. So we're really keen to make sure we provide feedback to you on these matters that you're working with, and we can all be contacted through the phone numbers on our website. Just going to move on, just give you a little bit of background. Looking at attendees, I realise a lot of people have got a lot of knowledge in the subject, so please bear with us if we're telling you some information that you already know. As we know, in our winter in Southland, we have around about 100 days a year where there's little or no pasture growth. So growing high density and nutrient-rich feed, such as forage crops, becomes really important to carry capital livestock until pasture production resumes. When this is done poorly, it can have serious negative effects on animal welfare and the environment, particularly fresh water. Nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and E. coli are contaminants which all have negative impacts on fresh water, and losses for these from grazing in winter forage crops are much higher than those from pasture grazed during other times of year. This is why careful planning for both cultivation and winter grazing are essential for tackling the risks associated with certain paddocks. And careful management of winter grazing will significantly reduce losses of nutrients, sediment, and E. coli. In the Ag Research study at Telford, which can be found on the Dairy NZ website, there's some really interesting stats that show the top to bottom grazing and protecting critical source areas and back fencing reduce soil loss by 90% and phosphorus loss by 85%. For some stats here, 656 kilograms per hectare of soil loss compared to 6,635 kilograms per hectare under a traditional grazing system, and 1.2 kilograms per phosphorus per hectare compared to 6.9 kilograms phosphorus per hectare for a traditional grazing system. Regulations are in place to help protect the soil and waterways by placing greater importance on paddock selection and strategic grazing to minimise your risk of contaminant loss. There will be time for questions at the end of our presentation, but please do put them into the chat as we go through. They may be moderated, but we've tried to get through as many as we possibly can. However, please bear in mind if we had any particular questions that we can't answer today, please rest assured we'll take them offline and make sure we get back to you afterwards. So moving over, I'll now hand through to Lauren from our regional planning team to take you through the development of some of the rules. Thank you.
The Southland Water and Land Plan has been through a robust planning process where we saw genuine engagement from a wide range of individuals and groups. Before the new plan was developed, the previous regional water plan had a rule which required consent for intensive winter grazing within 3 metres of a waterway. The proposed Southland Water and Land Plan was then developed in 2015 and 2016 as a foundation for future limit setting work to be built on top of. A main aim of the plan was to halt any further decline in water quality by managing activities known to affect the quality of Southland's fresh water. This included land use intensification, wintering, and stock in waterways, and an expectation of good management practices for all activities. A full draft of the proposed plan was shared publicly for consultation in late 2015, and the feedback received helped to inform and shape the details of the rules. The proposed plan was notified in June 2016, with anybody able to make a submission. Nearly 900 individuals and organisations submitted on the plan, and the hearing panel held public hearings on the reports, submissions and evidence. This included hearing directly from the submitters that wanted to speak to the panel, and in total, the hearing ran for 26 days between May and November 2017. After the hearing finished, the panel considered all of the information that had been put before them and developed their recommendations. These were then adopted by the Council and notified as the decisions version of the plan in April 2018. At this point, submitters on the plan were able to lodge an appeal with the Environment Court. 25 appellants made appeals on a range of provisions across the whole plan, including on intensive winter grazing. The court first heard appeals on the plan's objectives and policies that set the direction for managing freshwater and made interim decisions in 2019 and 2020 to inform the hearings on the remaining appeals, including the appeals on the rules. There was a lot of consideration through the Environment Court appeals process about the best way to manage intensive winter grazing while still maintaining water quality outcomes for the region. There was a range of appellants on intensive winter grazing, including Federated Farmers, Fonterra, Dairy NZ, Forest and Bird, Fish and Game, and Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu, and the court heard evidence from their technical experts and planners. The setback and slope combination on the conditions came through the Environment Court, where all parties involved agreed that it was an appropriate control to manage sediment and contaminant loss. There was scientific evidence put forward that confirmed the efficacy of setback and slope as a mitigation, and this evidence was not disputed. The result was the current conditions, which determine the width of the vegetated setback based on slope. The final version of the wording for the intensive winter grazing rule was decided by the court in May 2023. Following other decisions from the court, the rule, along with most of the remaining provisions in the plan, was made operative by Council in May 2024. What we have now is a clear way forward for managing wintering under a permitted activity rule, along with strong direction in the plan to guide applicants and decision makers if consent is required. The intensive winter grazing rule applies to the grazing of stock between the 1st of May and 30th of September on forage crops, including brassica, beet and root vegetable crop, but excluding pasture and cereal crops. We also have a rule for pasture-based wintering of cattle with conditions on setbacks and critical source areas. While this year's wintering season is drawing to an end, planning before you cultivate can set you up for next winter. We'll now hear from Anastasia, who will speak about planning your cultivation.
Good. Hi, so cultivation is a key farming activity that requires careful forward planning. If not managed well, it can lead to sediment and nutrient runoff that affects local waterways. So factors like paddock selection, slope, and cultivation method all influence the risk of contaminant loss. To manage these risks, as Lauren said, Rule 25 of the Southland Water and Land Plan sets out requirements to ensure cultivation is carried out in a way that protects water quality and soil health. The tables on the slide here, they outline the key permitted activity conditions that you need to follow when cultivating pasture or forage crops. So I think it's important to note on the slide here that cultivation buffers are dependent on the land or the slope being cultivated. So for example, you can see in that second box, 0 to 10 degree slopes require buffers of 5 meters from the waterway, while 10 to 20 degree slopes require buffers of 10 meters from the waterway. Now that's closer than waterway buffers or the stock exclusion zones that are required for grazing of winter crops. So effective cultivation planning goes beyond just meeting the rules though. It's about protecting your land, your waterways and your liability. So a good plan identifies risks, assigns responsibilities and ensures both you and any contractors understand what's expected. So next. Cool. So several parts of your cultivation plan overlap with the Appendix N Farm Environmental Management Plan. So getting this right will help with both of these. Before you start cultivating, you need to identify and map the critical source areas. Now, Keith will talk a bit more about critical source areas, but for the moment, these must be excluded from cultivation if you're planting forage crops for winter grazing, and they must be mapped in your farm environmental management plan. Also, before you start cultivating, confirm the paddock slopes to check if the buffer widths will meet the setback rules from waterways. And if you're cultivating in or near a critical source area for other purposes, you need to install sediment detention measures like silt traps before you begin. So follow all critical source specific practices outlined in your farm plan, and make sure all of this is included in your prepared farm environmental management plan. So really, you're just focusing on critical source areas, slopes, and setbacks in your cultivation plan. Now, if the contractor's doing the work, share the critical source area maps and your cultivation plan. Good idea to walk the paddocks together to confirm buffer zones and slope risks, and check that they understand erosion and sediment control measures. So now Keith will run through critical source areas.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming to this webinar. It's nice of you to take time out of your day. As you can see here, I have an example of a critical source area coming down the hill. It's in a low-lying area, and it's running with water across the surface of the paddock in a concentrated line after heavy rainfall, often during the winter when the soils are saturated. So I'll read out the definition and then I'll run through some examples. So a critical source area is a landscape feature like a gully, swale, or a depression, including ephemeral flow paths that accumulates runoff, sediment, and nutrients included from adjacent flats and slopes, and delivers it to surface water bodies, including lakes, rivers, artificial watercourses, and modified watercourses, or subsurface drainage systems. And it's also areas like silage stacks, fertilizer storage areas, and stock camps, anywhere that's a concentrated risk of nutrient loss. So targeting mitigation specifically to critical source areas is an efficient and cost-effective approach to reduce nutrient loss from your farm. And you know your farm best. If you walk around during heavy rainfall, when the soil is saturated, you'll see water flowing off slopes, and those are critical source areas. And the key points are, as we've already discussed today, exclude stock from them during winter grazing and don't cultivate them into winter crop, leave them in grass. So we'll go through a couple more examples. Next slide, please. So here's an aerial image of a critical source area. I've got on the left, you can see it's unmarked, and then on the right it's marked, but you can see the slight change in vegetation. You can see the slight creases. And so that's one way to identify critical source areas. If you have an aerial map of your farm, you can look around and see those sorts of areas, and often they web down, so they start as a fork and then they'll converge into a bigger one, and then a bigger one again, and eventually they'll become a waterway. Next slide, please. So this is an example of aerial map with crop, and the critical source area has been left in grass. And again, you can see the bales and the crop are kept away from the critical source area as much as possible. And it's a Y-shaped area, so the stock will have to come in the top, graze that section, and then either side, and stay out of the critical source area for that whole time. Next slide, please. So the key points to prevent sediment loss are, if it's a low-lying area and it runs surface water at any point in the year, then it's a critical source area. And the exact point where that water starts is the absolute minimum that we would expect to be left in grass and stock excluded during grazing. Often we won't know that minimum, so we advise to take a cautionary approach, and wherever there's a low-lying area in a paddock that you're winter grazing, to leave it in grass and not cultivate it. And a minimum of 3 meters is usually required to keep stock out of the critical source area. So there's no specified buffer distance that you're required to keep stock out of that critical source area, as long as the critical source area itself is left in grass and stock don't graze it. 3 meters is a rule of thumb, but if it's a flat, wide, low-lying kind of critical source area, then you'll need a lot more than that, and we'll have some examples later on. And all of the critical source area must be excluded from winter crop. So regardless of how many other paddocks the critical source area flows through, you might have 200 meters, 300 meters of grass and adjacent low-lying paddocks down below your crop that the water's going to flow through. That doesn't matter. Once water has flown through your crop and the sediment is mobilized, it doesn't matter how much water grass it goes through, it'll reach the waterway. So the whole critical source area from top to bottom, regardless of paddocks below it, needs to be left in grass and stock excluded. Next slide, please. Okay. So here we've got another couple examples. So top left, the critical source area comes down through the middle of that grass area. It's been grazed both sides, but the critical source area has been left in grass, and that's well and truly protected, and sediment loss has been reduced there. Top right, we've got the crop either side of the critical source area, and the critical source area is left in grass, and that's yet to be grazed. Stock won't go in there, and that's a perfect example of keeping the critical source area safe and in vegetation. Bottom right's a low-lying, wide critical source area, so that whole area is quite boggy, so that's been left out. And then bottom left is a cultivated paddock where the grass in the critical source area has been left out of the cultivation. So another great example of what to do. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of poor practice of what we were trying to avoid. So you can see the water coming down that critical source area. That's going to mobilize sediment, especially when stock are walking back and forth and it's raining and the soils are saturated. So this is after it's dried out a bit and it's not as bad, but it just shows those low-lying areas hold water and it runs. And with the stock moving back and forth, that's why the rule came in place to protect these areas. Next slide. And again, this is a critical source area from a few years ago before the rules came in that was grazed, and there's quite a serious flow that goes across, and that area's bare. There's no soil, no roots and no vegetation stopping the soil and nutrients being transported to the nearest waterway. And with stock moving through there as well, it really stirs it up and you lose a lot of nutrients to waterways. So it's important to leave them in grass and keep the stock out. Slide, please. Here's another good example of best practice. You've got the bales are kept as far away from the critical source area. The critical source area up the middle is left in grass and stock have been excluded. There's been a back fence used, and you can see the sections of crop that they've grazed each time, and then the back fence moves up. There's a portable water troughs. The stock have access to the water the whole time, despite being back fenced into a smaller section of the paddock. So everything in this photo illustrates good practice and what we would expect. Next slide, please. So, as discussed by Anastasia, buffers from waterways are dependent on the adjacent slope. So a 20-metre buffer from the bed of a waterway, regardless of whether there's any water in it at the time, if there's an adjacent slope of 10 to 20 degrees for winter crop, from the 1st of May to the 30th of September, and then a 10-metre buffer from the bed of a waterway on a slope of 0 to 10 degrees, so flatter areas, 10-metre buffer during the winter grazing period, 1st of May to the 30th of September. Slide. So here's an example. That slope is over 10 degrees and below 20, so you can crop it because it's below 20 degrees, and then it's got a 20-metre buffer from the edge of the waterway to the edge of the crop. They could have had 10 metres of that 20-metre setback in crop as long as they didn't graze it between the 1st of May and the 30th of September, but they've chosen to just leave the whole 20 metres in grass and leave that all out until they've finished grazing and regrass that paddock. So a really good example of adjacent slope measured, and now they've applied the correct buffer, and that's going to keep sediment and nutrients out of that waterway. So now that we need to know the slope beside that waterway to figure out what buffer to use. There's these tools that Environment Southland has on our website. The Cultivation Intensive Winter Grazing tool is a slope map you can use. There's maps and data, and there's also the Southland contours and elevation. So you can draw a line across your farm and get a cross section. So it shows the slope of your farm across that line that you've drawn. And there's other tools, including LiDAR, in terms of identifying critical source areas and slope on your farm. Often a clinometer app on your phone can be useful to get a specific slope measurement within your paddock. at the exact point that you need to know it. And we've got a video for that as well. So there's a few different options, but you really need to figure out that slope. Is it below 20 degrees? Yes, I can crop. Is it above 10 degrees or below 20 degrees? Then you can figure out what size buffer you need, and then you can apply that when you're planning your cultivation and winter grazing. So we're just going to quickly watch a video about how to measure slope with the Clinometer app on your phone, and then I'll pass you on to Paul, who's going to talk about the role of compliance in winter grazing.
Slope is measured over a 20-metre length. So as you can see, this is a 20-metre length between me and my lovely assistant down the hill. So once you've got a 20-metre length, then you move to looking across that and measure the slope. So here we've picked out a 20-metre section of hill, and now we want to know what that slope is. And there's various rules that relate to that slope. So now I'm going to come across and look directly across that section of slope to measure. So now I'm going to take my Clinometer app on my phone. I often find it easier to crouch down, and I'll line up the edge of my phone with the average slope, and I've got 16 degrees measured across the 20-metre area from top to bottom. Sometimes you might find it easier to have a standard and a reel and set that up and use that to line up with your phone, and sometimes you can use a fence if there's one on the edge. But the key is to look directly across the slope. If you're down lower or if you're looking up at the hill, it's not very easy to get that slope, so you just need to be perpendicular, looking directly across.
Hi, I'm Paul. So, compliance's role in winter grazing. What do we do? Consent monitoring. Compliance staff monitor all intensive winter grazing consents by visiting properties and assessing activities against consent conditions. Addressing non-compliance. When issues are found, the team work directly with consent holders to resolve them and ensure full compliance. Serious non-compliance. More serious non-compliance may be referred for formal investigation. Consent's role in winter grazing. Incident response. Responding to incidents. Compliance investigates all reported incidents related to intensive winter grazing. Some of these reports trigger a site visit to assess activities against permitted rules. Educating operators. Most cases lead to advice and education for landowners or operators to improve practices and meet standards. Serious non-compliance. More serious breaches may be referred for formal investigation. Compliance's role in winter grazing, proactive monitoring. Aerial monitoring flights. Each winter, compliance conducts 3 aerial flights across Southland to identify potential non-compliance with winter grazing rules. Follow-up site visits. Properties flagged during flights are visited by staff to assess activities on the ground. Education and support. Most visits result in advice and an education for landowners or operators to improve practices. And recognising good practice. Flights also showcase the positive efforts of Southland farmers in managing winter grazing responsibly. I'd now like to hand over to Nicola.
Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Nicola Bolling, and I'm the Freshwater Program Coordinator here at Environment Southland. On the screen, you can see a photo of our new Freshwater Program team. Standing alongside me in the photo is Carl Erickson, our Freshwater Program Lead, and our 3 new Farm Plan Advisors, David, Sylvia, and Becky. Our team's job is all about helping Southland farmers develop and deliver farm environmental management plans. We want them to be practical, tailored to your farm, and meet the regulatory requirements, all while improving freshwater outcomes in our region. Next slide. Under the Southland Water and Land Plan, all properties over 20 hectares will need a farm environmental management plan to meet the permitted activity rules. Our farm plan advisors are here to help make the process as straightforward and as simple as possible. They can visit your farm, walk you through the farm plan process, and give you practical step-by-step support to guide you through the whole process of creating a farm plan. We've got guidance material prepared, we've got example farm plans and templates if you're starting from scratch. We can review any existing farm plans and carry out a gap analysis to see if there's anything missing or anything that might need updating so that your farm plan will meet the new requirements. We can also provide technical assistance and help with mapping, identifying critical source areas, help put together an action plan, benchmarking, and any other information you'll need for certification. At the end of the day, we want to make sure your farm plan works for your farm, is high quality, and meets the regulations. As part of your farm environmental management plan, you're required to have an up-to-date winter grazing plan. As per the Southland Water and Land Plan under Appendix N, our Southland Farm Regulations, you'll need a winter grazing plan that demonstrates how you'll manage each paddock being intensively winter grazed. The winter grazing plan needs to be prepared before winter grazing starts on your farm. From the slide, you can see that the winter grazing plan should contain the location of the paddock on the farm. You could use, for example, your paddock number or a paddock name, the paddock slope of the paddock being winter grazed, the area, the crop type and expected yield, plus any supplementary feed that you'll be using, the stock type being grazed and the expected duration in the paddock. We want you to draw in any features such as your critical source areas and any water bodies. And we also want an explanation or some sort of description of your contingency plan for any adverse weather events. You'll see from the image on the screen that this winter grazing plan has arrows showing the grazing direction of the stock. It shows where bales will be laid out in the paddock, the temporary fencing around the critical source area, and the location of portable water troughs and the buffers to waterways. You'll probably notice that your winter grazing plan really is just recording on paper all the good management practices you carry out over winter. It simply is the process of taking the information that you instinctively know works well over winter on your farm and writing it down on paper for your own records and to share with your staff. This slide is a great diagram created by Beef and Lamb showing some good management practices farmers should undertake. The first one is writing down your winter grazing plan. It shows the grazing direction, downslope grazing, top to bottom, or however you'd like to describe it. There's also the last bite strip where you can leave a 20-metre buffer if you need to graze up the slope. The contingency plan for adverse weather events is also really important. How are you going to manage an extreme cold or wet spells? Have you left a couple of breaks close to a shelterbout to use in bad weather? Or do you have a standoff pad or a breakout zone in the paddock that you can roll out some bales of hay and put cows in there for 12 to 24 hours if needed? Do you graze your drier crop paddocks later in winter? Knowing what you plan to do is the most important thing. We've got some photos next. These are some photos of some good management practices showing back fencing, the portable water troughs. They're doing some downslope grazing, and there's some large buffers shown there. Another lot of photos next. These good management practices continue. You can see on the left it was the start of the before the paddock was grazed, and on the right afterwards. We've got some really good placement of bales away from the sensitive critical source areas, good buffers again, more back fencing, and placement of the bales early in the season to prevent rutting that can channel water and soil. And that's all for me.
Okay, thank you very much, team. As hopefully you can tell, we've got a really knowledgeable and passionate team here that really want to help with this activity. Just to recap briefly on what to remember to be compliant under the Southland Water and Land Plan for the 2025 intensive winter grazing season. Buffer sizes for grazing relate to slope. Please remember this is vegetated buffer, which means that this can be so many extra metres of crop left ungrazed until after the end of September. A 20-metre buffer from the bed of a waterway on a slope of 10 degrees or more. A 10-metre buffer from the bed of a waterway on a slope of 10 degrees or less. A 20-metre buffer from any regionally significant wetland. Critical source areas, as was highlighted by Keith's presentation, these are really, really important, and they must not be cultivated or grazed. And as has been highlighted by Nicola and Anastasia, ensure you have your Southland Farm Plan as Appendix N of the Southland Wood and Land Plan prepared and certified if necessary. That includes a winter grazing plan. So I'd just like to thank you again for joining this webinar. I'm just going to check to see if there's any questions in the Q&A. Yeah. No questions at this stage. We'll just give people another couple of minutes in case you've got anything that's top of mind that you'd like to flag to us. Probably just while we're waiting, just would recap that we, as you can probably tell, across our organisation, we put a lot of resource into the management of cultivation and intensive winter grazing. And most of the time people are doing really good activities, as Keith highlighted in some of his slides. If people need some further assistance, that's really what we're here to do. And that applies not only to the on-farm team, but also, as Paul highlighted, our compliance team. We do take some firmer action on compliance in some instances, but our first course of action is education. So we're here to try and educate people and help people to achieve compliance and get to where they need to be. So let's double check with Adrian whether there's any chat. Yeah. Hello, Matthew. I think you've got a question.
You should be able to unmute now, Matthew.
Matthew, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, I see Matthew's taken his hand down, but if you want to ask that question, Matthew, there's a space here now. Okay, that's all right. Looks like you can't unmute Matthew, but please feel free to put your question into the chat and we'll follow up and come back to you. See another question coming through now, so just hold on.
What is the policy about these? Are they to declare them at the first greeting on farm? Body cams.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. It's a good question. I'll hand over to Paul to deal with some of the detail, but obviously in some instances we will use body cams and we do have a formal policy around that. I'll just hand through to Paul to take you through that in a little bit more detail.
So the question was relating to the use of body cameras, is that correct? Yes. We wear them to protect ourselves and the public. Some of our visits are undertaken over the intensive winter grazing period, sometimes a little bit of conflict, so they're to protect you as well as us. So there's no he said, she said. Basically, all I've really got to say on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Just to add to that, I've managed a range of regulatory functions over the years. And as I mentioned earlier, Environment Southland does have a formal policy around the use of body cams. Body cams are used reasonably widely in the local government sector. We don't spring them on people. It's always quite clear and obvious that the body cam is being used, and we're required to make that very clear on when it's used on site. But as Paul has highlighted, they're a useful tool. We want to work collaboratively and positively with people, but they have been shown to be effective at minimising some of those adversarial interactions, which are not common, but we do happen from time to time. And we take the safety and security of our staff really, really seriously.
Available on the website.
Is sorry, just to make it clear also, we will be sharing the presentation after this if anyone's got any other queries or you want to recap on any of that content. We have got also 3 upcoming field days on intensive winter grazing, and we'll send you that information so you can confirm where they are. Trying to get around the province and that heading up to, one of them is in Te Anau, so we're heading up to the northwestern part of our region, and also moving through the rest of South and try and distribute them so they're reasonably well located and we can get as many people there as possible.
No question.
Okay, thanks for that message, Matthew. Appreciate everyone's attendance in this. We have no further questions at this stage, so we will close the session. Just like to say thanks again to our team here for the work you put into this presentation, and particularly to our communications team, who do a massive amount of work behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see. So really huge kudos to them, and thanks again everybody for your attendance. Have a good day.